Outpost Echo Bravo Tango looked like someone had bolted a strip mall and a fallout shelter together, slung it into orbit, and then promptly forgotten it existed. Staff Sergeant Riley Razor Quinn, U.S. Navy SEAL, arrived with 2 duffel bags, 1 sidearm, and an expression that screamed, bored enough to punch a comet. She was supposed to be here for a low-threat observational deployment, a glorified vacation for a classified reason no one had bothered to explain. The peacekeeping brass figured her combat record made her the perfect calming presence for this outpost's new diplomatic attachment. Instead, Riley spent her first 3 days inventorying outdated survival rations and teaching the station's janitorial bots how to salute. Then came day 4. Alarms blared at 0430 for what the station AI, CLAIR, described as ambient anomaly detection, which turned out to mean something was bleeding hard enough to trip the motion sensors. Riley, powered by bad coffee and spite, grabbed a stun rifle and stomped to the outer perimeter, expecting space raccoons or maybe an intern who forgot how doors worked. What she found instead was a thing, a huge thing. 8 feet tall, bleeding bioluminescent sludge, half exoskeleton and half nightmare, sprawled across the deck like someone had dropped a dinosaur into a blender and hit regret. It opened one eye, all fangs and fury, and tried to roar. Riley shot it square in the snout. Down, boy. The monster blinked, wheezed, and passed out. Naturally, Riley dragged it inside. Because why not bring an apex predator into a secure military outpost? She named it Toothy, after it bit a panel off the mess hall wall. Medbay refused to admit it, citing galactic protocol about housing hyperlethal fauna. Riley duct-taped a recovery bed to the ceiling and declared the broom closet Temporary K9 Housing Unit Alpha. CLAIR had a digital panic attack and filed 17 incident reports. Riley rewrote them into a feeding chart. Within 24 hours, Toothy could recognize her voice, respond to the word sit, kind of, and had learned not to eviscerate the cafeteria staff. Progress. Quinn treated his training like boot camp for monsters. She clapped when he didn't destroy the coffee maker. She tossed beef jerky as a reward for not disemboweling the mail drone. She even got him a harness with a neon "Good Boy" mostly patch, which he wore with grim dignity. Word of her unlicensed murder pet spread fast. By the end of the week, 2 diplomats fainted after seeing her walk Toothy on a retractable leash, humming the Marine Corps hymn. One alien ambassador sobbed into her translator collar, whispering, "The treaty said nothing about domesticating genocide." Riley, chewing on an energy bar, replied, "Relax, he only bites when I tell him to." CLAIR began self-diagnosing glitches every time Toothy wagged his barbed tail near vital infrastructure. The AI even started sending psychological distress queries to Earth Command, all flagged with the subject, Sergeant Quinn's unauthorized pet project, again. They were ignored. Toothy grew stronger, more obedient, and, according to Riley, less melty. He now performed basic commands like stay, heal, and don't incinerate the ambassador's shoes. Unfortunately, his rollover still demolished entire hallways. Alien protocol officers filed panic memos, warning that Sergeant Quinn was training a bioweapon using Earth-centric behavioral reinforcement tactics. Riley taped one memo to Toothy's back as a cape and taught him to bow with it. Meanwhile, security footage of her using a laser pointer to lure him away from unauthorized snacks, also known as diplomats, leaked onto the galactic net. The footage went viral. Comment sections ranged from "Humanity is insane" to "Where can I get one?" The Veloxians called for an emergency ethics summit. The Blount started charging Toothy drool damage premiums. The Torgos Union secretly requested training manuals. Quinn, unfazed, spent her nights sharpening knives and humming lullabies to a death machine that purred like a thunderstorm and liked its belly rubbed with a carbon wrench. And CLAIR? The AI's logs were starting to sound more like desperate diary entries than tactical reports. Day 12. Subject Quinn has introduced the apex entity to nap time. It appears happy. I fear for us all. Riley read that aloud, snorted, and tossed Toothy another beef jerky. Don't worry, buddy. They'll catch up eventually. Or you'll catch them. The monster burped, then fell asleep on her foot. And for the first time in Outpost EBT's history, the phrase, "everything's under control," wasn't immediately followed by, "run." By the time the first wave of galactic diplomatic observers arrived at Outpost Echo Bravo Tango, Staff Sergeant Riley Quinn had already taught Toothy to shake hands. Granted, it still required him to retract 3 claws and not drool acidic. Mucus mid-greeting. But hey, progress is progress. The delegation from the Veloxian Accord arrived first, their ceremonial sashes already stained with anxiety sweat. The lead ambassador, a spindly mantis with the voice of a broken fax machine, nearly fainted when Toothy pranced into the conference room carrying a chew toy made from decommissioned drone parts. "Contain that abomination!" he squealed, recoiling, behind a stack of ethics codes. Quinn just smiled, tossed the chew toy into the hallway and said, "Fetch, murder muffin." Toothy bolted after it with joyous thunder, sending the delegation's security details scattering like terrified leaf blowers. CLAIR, now in full emotional breakdown mode, begged Quinn over the comms to please reconsider hosting galactic ambassadors during your creature's enrichment time. Quinn responded by printing out a pamphlet titled How Not to Get Bitten, Beginner's Guide to Respecting the Murder Lizard, and made it mandatory reading for all incoming dignitaries. She held daily press briefings at 600 sharp, complete with coffee, donuts, and safety demonstrations, where she wore bite-resistant sleeves and handed toothy rubber bones while explaining the difference between playful chomping and war crimes. Meanwhile, galactic news networks had a collective meltdown. The Blaunt issued a trade advisory rating Earth, high risk, moderate smell, unpredictably affectionate. The Torgos Union put their elite death commandos on standby, only to call them off after security footage showed Toothy cuddling with Quinn on a couch made from reinforced landing foam, both of them snoring in sync. Commentators argued whether the US Navy had weaponized emotional manipulation, or if Toothy had been brainwashed by Stockholm Syndrome and snacks. Either way, the mood across the Galactic Diplomatic Corps shifted from horror to something worse. Uncertainty. Because nobody, not the Veloxians with their trillion-page legal codes, nor the Blaunt with their endless risk assessment flowcharts, could figure out how to respond to the fact that a human was actively training the galaxy's most feared predator to sit for treats and roll over when threatened by bureaucrats. Quinn, in response to their confusion, began hosting live-streamed training sessions titled Snuggles and Subjugation, Domestication for the Doomsday Inclined. Viewer numbers skyrocketed. One session included her teaching Toothy how to sniff out unfiled diplomatic forms. Another demonstrated emotional de-escalation via targeted scritches. The Veloxians demanded she be censured for violating 10,000 interspecies safety protocols. Quinn sent them a custom-made bobblehead of herself riding Toothy into battle with a flag that read, "Compliance this." Meanwhile, Toothy began differentiating between diplomats based on snack quality. The higher the calorie content of the welcome basket, the more polite he became. One Blaunt representative brought a crate of Earth-imported jerky and received a gentle head nuzzle. Another brought fruit cubes and got his translator drooled on. Word spread, if you wanted to survive a visit to EBT, you'd better pack protein. CLAIR compiled this into an official station guideline titled Bribery Best Practices, Appeasing the Beast. Riley continued her campaign of tactical hospitality, now offering trust walks with Toothy to nervous dignitaries. These involved leash drills, emergency extraction drills, and bonding exercises where they tossed old diplomatic memos into the incinerator together. It was around this time that the Torgos Union requested an emergency observer delegation, led by a decorated war general who believed he could intimidate both Quinn and her murder pet into submission. He arrived with his chest puffed and a translator set to menacing baritone. 5 minutes later, he was sitting on the floor of the training bay, feeding toothy jerky from a tongs while Quinn recited bedtime stories in a voice laced with sarcasm and caffeine withdrawal. "He just wants structure," she explained, handing the general a squeaky toy shaped like a Wasnt ambassador. "Don't we all?" The general didn't respond, mostly because Toothy had curled around him protectively and was now vibrating with contentment. Somewhere deep in the Galactic Mutual Understanding League's headquarters, a blinking red alert activated, titled Cross-Species Emotional Bonding Crisis Detected. But by then, it was too late. Riley Razor Quinn had turned Outpost Echo Bravo Tango into the galaxy's most unstable daycare center, and Toothy, death incarnate in a vest labeled Good Boy, was her star pupil. The rest of the galaxy just hadn't caught up to the fact that Quinn wasn't domesticating the monster. She was training the universe, one snarky quip and leash tug at a time. By the time the Galactic Mutual Understanding League officially lost its collective composure, Staff Sergeant Riley Razor Quinn had already taught Toothy how to differentiate between murder glare and friendly glare, complete with laminated flashcards. The crisis really began when the GMUL convened an emergency summit titled Threat Containment Protocol for Biological Anomalies, trained by emotionally unstable primates. The title alone pissed off half of Earth's delegation, who responded by forwarding a 7-terabyte video compilation of Quinn teaching Toothy to play hide-and-seek using cloaking fields. Meanwhile, back at Outpost EBT, Quinn sipped coffee from a mug that read, "Insubordination is just initiative with bad timing," and reviewed her newest fan mail, most of it from Torgos hatchlings who now wanted their own bitey best friend. The GMUL, flailing like a bureaucratic jellyfish in a vacuum, drafted a 49-page ban on human-led cross-species behavior modification of weaponized fauna. Riley printed it out, rolled it into a tube, and gave it to Toothy as a chew toy. When the paper was returned in the form of a soggy, acid-scorched clump, she handed it back to the League with a note. Response attached. Recommend using metal if you want it to survive feedback. CLAIR updated its logs with a grim new entry. Subject Quinn now actively encouraging interstellar policy degradation through interpretive dog training. By now, Quinn had taught Toothy both attack and hug commands. Unfortunately, they looked exactly the same. The distinction, she insisted, was tone. When pressed, she demonstrated by yelling, "Hug!" at a steel training dummy, which Toothy promptly tackled, disarmed, and licked. Galactic safety committees called it psychological warfare. Quinn called it advanced snuggle readiness. In a last-ditch attempt to reassert authority, the GMUL deployed 2 elite compliance officers, backed by a mobile arbitration court, and 3 legal bots armed with emotion-neutralizing field generators. They arrived wearing hazard suits and clutching policy tablets like holy relics. Riley greeted them in gym shorts, a tank top that read, "Snack Squad," and a leash wrapped around one arm like a bandolier. Toothy stood beside her, wearing his ambassador, "Do not pet unless you have treats," vest, panting happily. The officers began their audit by attempting to scan Toothy's neural activity. The scan ended when the equipment spontaneously melted from exposure to what analysts later called excessive cognitive sass. The bots tried to cite her for failure to register a biothreat. She fed them to the station's recycling chute, politely, with a printed warning sign and a peanut. Butter trail. The mobile court self-evacuated after Toothy licked one of the judge's robes and left a radioactive stain in the shape of a heart. Quinn held an impromptu press conference afterward, calling it a positive step forward in interspecies affection jurisprudence. By now, even the more stoic civilizations were cracking. The Torgos War Council accidentally adopted Quinn's leash-based diplomacy method after discovering that one of their juvenile drake beasts responded better to praise than punishment. The Veloxian Accord spiraled into philosophical chaos when a leaked video showed Quinn reading bedtime stories to Toothy from a manual on nuclear deterrence, while he snuggled a teddy bear made of repurposed combat foam. The Blorn's insurance industry collapsed under the strain of claims marked lick-induced corrosion. Outpost EBT was now unofficially categorized as a Class 3 cultural anomaly zone. Quinn, unbothered, focused her efforts on teaching. Toothy new commands like wagtail in non-threatening manner and drop the diplomat. When asked if she understood the consequences of her actions, she smirked and said, "Of course I do. That's why I'm still doing them." CLAIR, now one passive-aggressive error message away from full system burnout, began composing emotionally charged poetry in its log files. Excerpt: "O vast starfields, take me now, before she teaches the lizard how to dance." But the most unsettling part for galactic officials wasn't the threat Toothy posed. It was the realization that he didn't want to hurt anyone anymore, unless Quinn asked. And Quinn? She'd started looking at the galactic hierarchy like it was just another obstacle course. One that could be solved with duct tape, snack incentives, and a smile sharp enough to qualify as a weapon. The universe had tried to regulate her. Now it was playing fetch with the consequences. The galactic crisis began, as most do, with two pompous civilizations arguing over who invented peace and who had trademarked the color blue. The Veloxians accused the Torgos Union of weaponizing font sizes in a diplomatic communique. The Torgos responded by deploying 3 battleships to the neutral zone of mild annoyance. The entire Galactic Mutual Understanding League went into DEFCON bureaucrat and began printing cease and desist scrolls faster than they could be shredded by angry planetary PR departments. Amidst the rising tension, Quinn sat on the floor of Outpost Echo Bravo Tango's training bay, surrounded by shredded galactic law books, brushing Toothy's armored scales with a barbecue-basting brush and humming the tune to Born to be Wild. CLAIR interrupted with a nervous ping. Alert. Imminent interstellar conflict detected. Suggested response: panic. Quinn sipped her 5th cup of tactical espresso and muttered, "Nah, we're going full-fetched diplomacy." Moments later, she and Toothy arrived at the Intergalactic Summit of Passive Aggression aboard a borrowed Blornt diplomat skiff, which she had bartered for using beef jerky and a promise not to walk Toothy through their crystal embassy ever again. The summit was in chaos. Delegates screamed in over 30 languages. Security drones hovered like caffeinated mosquitoes. And somewhere in the background, an ambassador fainted into a fruit tray. Quinn strolled through it all like she was back at the base PX looking for sail ammo, Toothy at her side wearing a custom harness labeled Situational Peacekeeper, may contain violence. With the two warring factions seconds from igniting a galaxy-wide skirmish over textile tariffs and emotional sovereignty violations, Riley did what any rational Navy SEAL with a leash, a starship hull plate, and a completely broken regard for interstellar etiquette would do. She threw a frisbee. A repurposed titanium hull disc, engraved with the words, "Unity is a contact sport," spun through the air with the grace of impending doom. Toothy launched after it like a nuclear-powered Labrador, bowling over both Torgos and Veloxian delegates. Mid-scream and landing in a tangled pile of limbs, paperwork, and surprise reconciliation, the room froze. Then, to the collective horror and awe of the galactic elite, Toothy dropped the frisbee in the Veloxian ambassador's lap and gave a hopeful tail thump. The Torgos war chief blinked. The Veloxian diplomat whimpered. And then, slowly, one of them patted Toothy on the nose. The other offered him a treaty scroll soaked in meat juice. Quinn, leaning against a table she wasn't supposed to touch, simply said, "See? Now that's positive reinforcement." Applause broke out. Confused, hesitant, and slightly panicked applause, but applause nonetheless. Treats were deployed. The Blornt began selling licensed plush versions of Toothy within the hour. The GMUL, in a desperate bid to pretend this was all part of their plan, declared Quinn an honorary peace envoy and hastily rewrote protocol to include active, leash diplomacy and treat-based deterrence models. They also banned frisbees, unanimously and retroactively. Outpost EBT was reclassified as a special diplomacy unit with full ambassadorial privileges and an emergency snack budget that rivaled most planetary defense expenditures. Quinn requested a zero-gravity dog park be built in orbit. It was approved. In 37 seconds. Toothy was formally appointed as Ambassador-at-Large for non-specific hug-based resolutions, complete with a tiny bow tie, a ceremonial sash, and an encrypted badge that doubled as a squeaky toy. Galactic schools added Quinian conflict resolution tactics to their ethics curriculum. The Torgos rewrote their war hymns into lullabies, and CLAIR, now fully sentient and on 3 different medications, concluded its final mission log with the words, "Emotional dominance achieved. Sanity unsalvageable. Recommend snacks." Riley Quinn, Staff Sergeant and certified galaxy tamer, looked out at a universe she'd bent into emotional submission with grit, sarcasm, and tactical affection, and she smiled the dangerous smile of someone who wasn't done yet. The future was wide open, the leash was short, and somewhere out there another apex predator was probably waiting to learn how to play fetch.